Welcome back to our second lesson on Genesis, part 2 of this fall semester 2026. We're looking at the calling of Abram from Ur of the Chaldees and his responsibilities to go into what would eventually become the land of Israel. When God called him, he called him out of Ur. We talked about last time. Talked about his family, the time period that it was that he lived in. But we also see the importance of him obeying God, doing what God told him, wanted him to do. Now, he doesn't initially do exactly what God's called him to do. He hesitates. We see in chapter 11, 31 to 32, we see the delay. He allowed his father Terah and nephew Lot to accompany him. And God told him when he called him to leave his family, he said, Terah took Abram his son, Lot the son of Haran, his son's sons, Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with him from Ur of the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan, and they came unto Haran and dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So we see that there was a slight delay in that he left, but they stayed there until his father-in-law died, Terah. Abram was to leave his family. Now, we're not sure exactly why. I mean, obviously he could take his wife Sarai, and we know he took Lot, and we see the consequences of that action, but that wasn't Abraham's fault. But for whatever reason, they settled in Haran, and Haran would become an important place. Later on in the Bible, sometimes it's known as Padan Haran. This is where Rachel and Leah lived with their father when Jacob fled Esau and would eventually flee up to Padan Aram, and where he would meet Rachel and Leah. And so, very significant place historically for Abraham anyway. His family did live up there, and we know that Rachel and Leah were related to Jacob distantly, which was perfectly acceptable in these days. Haran was about 700 miles northwest of Ur, and about 60 miles from the Euphrates. So quite a distance that he traveled, 700 miles to get up to there. That's known as the Fertile Crescent. Now the next map will show you. I'll show you where the Fertile Crescent was. Haran is here, and so this is the Mediterranean here. Jerusalem down here. Ur of the Chaldees over here. Euphrates River here, and the Hiddekel or Tigris rivers here that flow down into the Persian Gulf. And so today this would be Iraq. Iran's over here, and of course we see that very much in the news today. So when Abram left Ur of the Chaldees, everywhere he was to go, we'll talk about the shoe covenant later on. The shoe covenant is wherever Abraham walked, that would be the land that God would give him. Now, Israel has never controlled all the land that it was supposed to control, and will not control that until the millennial kingdom, as far as we know. Now, I guess something could happen today, it'd have to be a very extreme thing for Israel to gain control all the way over to Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. Here's the country of Jordan today, Saudi Arabia here, and again Iraq over here. But Ur of the Chaldees and the Euphrates River, all this land up through here, in fact, all the land over to here, all the way down, so Lebanon, Syria, all that will one day belong to Israel, all the way down to, here's the Nile River, so all the way down here and back across will one day be the land of Israel. Now that won't happen until the millennial kingdom, when there's peace in the world. Israel today is here, and it's just very short. Well, actually, it goes down. You can't see it because of the here's the Red Sea down here. And so it goes down, all the way down to Elat is the place today. And so from Elat up here around, and of course, we know they don't even control all the land of Israel today. There are pockets of it controlled by the Palestinians. For the most part, here just in the Gaza Strip or Philistia, where they control today. Not known as Philistia anymore, now it's known as Palestine. But Israel here, and a little control over here by Palestine. And so one day Israel will own this. So wherever Abraham walked, that will belong to him. We know Abraham went all the way down into Egypt. We'll see that story here eventually. But Terah, Abraham's father, his name means delay. And for whatever reason, God chose to use names in the Old Testament very significantly. Today, we don't really do that as much. We don't name people their name typically because of the meaning of it. But God did that in the Old Testament, and to help us understand, I guess, the history of Israel. Somewhat in the New Testament, names were given and they meant something, but not always. Thomas means twins, but there's no evidence that Thomas was a twin. But he could have been. There's no biblical evidence of that. And so for the most part, names in the New Testament have a meaning, but even more so in the Old Testament. Like I say, today, names, while they have meanings, you can look up meanings of names. Very rarely, I don't know of anybody who named their child what they named them because of the meaning of it. It could happen, but I just don't know of it. But Terah means delay. Abram is Abba. Abba is the Hebrew word for father. And so Abraham was the father of many people, father of a nation. Abram stayed here up at Haran, up at the Fertile Crescent. Was very fruitful there. He gained a lot of wealth. Remember, Abraham's journey started when he was 75 years old, and his life ended when he was 175 years old. So 100 years is what he spent totally on his journeys throughout. In Genesis 12:5, he says, souls that he got in Haran. This may have a twofold meaning to it. The word souls here may be the people that he led to the Lord as such. Abraham's influence on some Haranites to follow Jehovah. Because remember, when Abraham left Ur of the Chaldees, or before he left, growing up for his first 75 years of life, he served idols. And now his goal is to reach people and show them the way of the Lord. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, all the substance that they had, and the souls they had gotten in Haran. And they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and to the land of Canaan they came. So Abram was very successful financially in his journeys, and not that he was interested in that, but he was about to be the father of many people, father of a nation, and so God gave him the means to do that. In Genesis 12:5-9, Abraham arrived at Shechem. Shechem is another important place in Israel's history. It's the valley between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. We'll talk a lot about that throughout the semesters because it was a very significant place for Israel. Mount Ebal is a mount of cursing, and Mount Gerizim is a mount of blessing. So you have this valley, and then these two mountains on either side that God told Moses in the wilderness journey that when you arrive into the land of Israel and you come up to the valley of Shechem, so I want you to set up the different tribes in different places there and to gather them there at the valley of Shechem. And I want you to basically preach to them Deuteronomy 28 and 29, and which are the blessings and cursings. Now, as I said, Mount Ebal was a mount of cursing. It was barren. It had no vegetation on it. Mount Gerizim, on the other hand, had all types of vegetation. And so it was a visual picture to the children of Israel when they got into the land. And God did a lot of visual pictures to Israel. The stones that were gathered from the Jordan River, 12 of them set up in the midst of the Jordan River, and 12 set up at Gilgal. So that every time they walked by these stones, it would be a reminder how God led them across the Jordan River dry, and how that they were to remember that. And we see a lot of that throughout the scriptures. A lot of things were set up to be visual reminders of what God was trying to teach the children of Israel. Well, the Mount Gerizim, like I said, was a mountain of blessing. In Deuteronomy 28, and I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but it talks about the importance of serving God, and it says that I will bless you if you do certain things. And basically the first 15 so verses out of Deuteronomy 28 are the blessings. And one of them is, if you follow me, when your enemies come before you one way, they will flee before you 7 different ways. But when it gets to the cursings, it says if you don't do what I tell you to do, when your enemies come before you one way, that you will flee 7 different ways. So kind of reverse it on them. Well, that's the importance of following God. We have to understand that with sin, there's consequences. And I know today people don't understand that. They don't understand the consequences of sin. They don't understand what's going on in the world that we live in today, and how the world has neglected the true living God, so much so that we are reaping what we've sowed. The sin that's going on in the world today is just destroying us, and people don't even want to call it sin anymore. They want to call it, it's my choice, my view, or I made a mistake, but it's no big deal. Well, it is a big deal. When a nation turns God, it also says in Deuteronomy 28 that if you turn on me so much that you get to the point where you turn to eating your own children. And we see that Israel's history shows that that's what happened when people got so far away from God. I remember one story that we believe it was King Ahab, one of the northern kings. I'm not exactly sure of the timing, but we believe it was him. That he was out riding his horse one day and ran across 2 women, and the 2 women were arguing with one another. And he inquired as to what was going on, and one said, well, yesterday we agreed to eat my son, my baby, and we did that. Now today we agreed to eat her baby, but she won't give me any. Even Ahab, who was a wicked king, rode off in disgust over what was going on in the world that day. Can people really turn to doing that? They're doing it already. Maybe not eating their own babies, but they're killing them, they're killing one another. They've turned so far away that they'll kill you for $5 today or less, or just for the fun of it. It's a sad, sad world we live in, but God said that's exactly what's going to happen if we turn away from Him. And we see that this country, and I'm sure other countries as well, have turned away from God, and look at the condition that the world's in today. And people don't seem to really care. He set up camp beside the oak at Morah, and here God appeared to him there, promising to give the land to Abram and his descendants. Well, Abram built his first recorded altar at this time and worshiped God. Genesis 13, 3 and 4. And he went on his journeys from the south, even to Bethel. unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hai, unto the place of the altar which he had made there at the first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. So we see here the importance of him leaving. I'm sorry, somebody's pulling up at the window here. I'm not sure who it is. I don't think they belong here anyway. All right, never mind. Let's get back to this. Sorry about that. And he went on his journeys from the south, even to Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hai. Bethel is, maybe 15 miles from Jerusalem, very, very close to Jerusalem, and, where Jerusalem would end up being. And to the place of the altar which he had made there first, and there Abraham called on the name of the Lord. Abraham then at Luz. Now, Luz, again, a very significant place in the Bible. Luz means separated. Later on, when Jacob flees Esau, he goes to Luz, and at Luz, he changed the name of Luz to Bethel. Now, the reason here in Genesis 13, and he went on his journey from the south even to Bethel. Technically, and this is not a mistake in the Bible by any means, but technically, when Abraham went on his journeys, he went south even to Luz. Now, why does the Bible say Bethel then? Well, when Jacob got that to Luz, that's where he wrestled with God, and then he changed the name of Luz to Bethel. Bethel meaning the house of God. Beth, Beit, means house. El means God. So God's house or the house of God. So why does Genesis 13 say Bethel instead of Luz? Because when they read it later on, if it had said Luz and Luz didn't exist anymore, they would not have been familiar with it. So God had, when Moses wrote this down, it had already been called Bethel for a long time. And so they knew where Bethel was, and they said, well, go to Luz. I said, well, where's Luz? Luz is now Bethel. So instead of calling it Luz, God called it Bethel so that the readers of the day would understand exactly what place he was talking about. So Abraham later restored fellowship here. Now, again, kind of interesting because this is where Jacob got in fellowship with God somewhat. He wasn't a perfect man, remember, but it is where he wrestled with God. It's where he changed the name of separated. He was separated from God. Now he goes to the house of God. Interesting, later on, after 20 years up in Haran, when Jacob comes back, eventually he goes back to Bethel, and he doesn't call it Bethel anymore, he calls it El Bethel. Now, he doesn't change the name of the city or the place, he just changes what he calls it. Instead of calling it the house of God, he calls it El Bethel, put E-L in front of this, El Bethel. Instead of calling it the house of God, he calls it the God of the house of God. Which is really important. It's important because that's what we need to understand. We call our churches the house of God, and maybe that's fine, rightfully so in some ways. But what's more important than going to the house of God is going to the God of the house of God. Luz, Bethel, Jacob's ladder, dream, abandonment of idols were there. Again, a very, very significant place in Israel's history. In Genesis 20, later in 28, and then in Genesis 35. And that's how it has a dream of the angels ascending and descending upon the ladder. When we think of ladder with rungs on it that you climb up. But probably this may have meant stairs, because historically speaking, that's what they had, and that's what they would use that terminology for stairs as well. But it's not important. It's just that we know that he did have the dream. Of course, we see the carnality of Abraham. This is, again, Abraham is not a perfect man, And God reveals very often in Bible characters' lives not only the good things he did, but oftentimes the bad things that he did. His deception. When Abraham got down into Canaan, there was a famine going on. And Abraham went down to Egypt. It says in Genesis 10 through 20, there was a famine in the land, and Abraham went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said to Sarai his wife, Behold, now I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. He said, You're a very beautiful woman. And this is the carnal mind. This is the sinfulness of mankind. Abraham knew his wife was beautiful. And he decided that I've got to protect her. And so he said, when we get down there, he said, Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, they shall say, This is his wife, and they will kill me. But they will save thee alive. So verse 13, he says, So don't tell them you're my wife, tell them you're my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. What came to pass that when Abram was coming to Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman, that she was very fair. The princes also of Pharaoh saw her, and commended her before Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And he entreated Abram well for her sake, and he had sheep and oxen and he asses and men servants and maid servants and she asses and camels. And the Lord plagued Pharaoh in his house with great plagues because of Sarah, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called to Abram and said, What is this that thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was thy wife? Why saidst thou, She is my sister? So I might have taken her to be my wife. Now therefore, behold, thy wife, take her and go thy way. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him. They sent him away, and his wife, and all that he had. See, Abraham decided that I've got to fix this, because if they find you so beautiful and you're my wife, they're going to kill me, and you'll be alive, but I'll be dead. So let's just say that you're my sister. Well, God revealed to Pharaoh the truth. The problem is, Abraham tried to fix it his way, and if he just let God do what God does, he wouldn't have to worry about his safety. He would have commended his life to the Lord and understood that no matter what happens, God's in control, and God can spare me this day, and if he doesn't, then, well, I'll be with him anyway, so what's the big deal? But the problem is, does what most people tend to do today, and that's try to fix things on their own. People get into financial problems, and so they take a second job or a third job that keeps them away from the Lord, keeps them out of church, by justifying, say, well, God expects me to pay my bills, and so therefore I had to take this job. I had somebody come up and ask me if I'd pray for them to find a job that they'd be working during church time. And I said, do you think God wants you to lay out of church? They said, well, God wants me to pay my bills. And I said, I'm not praying for you to get a job. In fact, I'm going to pray you don't get that job, because that takes you away from the Lord. But people try to fix things on their own. If you're in financial trouble, don't you think God can handle that? Now, there's things that you have to do. You have to cut back, and you have to pay your bills. You have to honor the people that you got money from or goods from. But God's in control. God can take care of these things. Abraham just didn't get it. And later on, he's not going to get it. And his son's not going to get it. It's just that sin nature just kicks in sometimes and takes us away from the Lord. I mean, all he had to do was trust God. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning that they sent him away. I mean, here, this Pharaoh, God got through to. Abraham, he didn't. Why? Again, that carnal nature. Where we trust God, we trust God. Something happens and we take our eyes off Him. I think of the disciples in the boat. When Jesus came walking on the water, what did He say? When Peter was there and he said, Lord, bids me come to thee. And then Peter got out of the boat and he stood on the water. And all of a sudden a storm came up. And Peter here, instead of looking at Jesus, he turned to the storm. And what happened? Well, immediately he started sinking. Now, that was wrong, and he took his eyes off the Lord. But what was right about that is the first words out of his mouth was, Lord, save me. See, he didn't try to get back on the boat. We know Peter can swim. John 21, he was a fisherman. Of course he could swim. They spent most of their life on the water. But in John 21, when he saw Jesus, he swam to shore. So instead of swimming back to the boat or calling out the disciples, throw me a net, help me out, first words out of his mouth was, Lord, save me. So I commend Peter for doing that. But Peter did what we tend to do, is that we follow Jesus, storm comes up, we look at the storm, and then we start sinking. And our next word should be, Lord, save me. Well, Abraham should have done that. He didn't. So he persuaded Sarai. I have Sarah here, and again, I talked about this last time, and I wish I could fix my mind and be consistent on this. At this point, it's still Sarai, and it's still Abram. Later on, it will be named Sarah, this spelling, and Sarah and Abram had the same father, different mother. So people say, well, when Abram said, say you're my sister, that's a half lie. Well, no, it's not a half lie. It's like if you dig a hole 10 foot down in the ground, right? And then you fill half of it back up. What do you have? You have a hole, right? Instead of 10 foot down, it's 5 foot down, but it's still a hole. A half lie, is a lie. You can't have a half lie. It's always a lie. Said he not to me, she is my sister, and even she herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocency of my hands have I done this. So, Pharaoh determined to make Sarah his wife, and God judged that. A warning to Pharaoh that you cannot take this man's sister, wife. Pharaoh rebuked Abram for deceiving him. You think that Abram would have broke down and asked God for forgiveness? Maybe he did. We just don't have a record of it. In Exodus 15, Isaiah 14:29, Isaiah 14:31, and Joel 3:4. The word Palestina is used in Exodus 15:14. Palestina is used in Isaiah 14:29. Palestina is used in 14:31. Joel, Palestine, is used. Now, the reality of it is all four of these words are exact same words, and that is the word Philistia. So, what people today want to refer to Palestine as, Palestine is a group of people. It's really not the property. Now I know some people want to refer to Israel as Palestine, but it's not Palestine. Never has been Palestine. Philistia was just an area within Israel. In fact, it would cover Ashdod, Akron, down through here. Gaza is over here. Gath is over here. So it's just a part, one part of Israel. So Abraham's deception in Philistia in chapter 20. Years later, another famine. This time Abram went to Philistia. So what did he do? Well, he should have remembered what God did in the past, but he doesn't. Now Abimelech is the king of Philistia, and he determined to marry Sarah. Same situations, famine. Just like the famine sent him down to Egypt. Now famine sends him over to Philistia. And again, Abraham lies. At this point, God steps into the picture and he plagued the household of Abimelech, just like he did with Pharaoh. He warned the king not to marry Sarah. He warned the king not to harm Abraham. Again, we could look at Abraham and think, man, how stupid, how foolish, why would you do this again? I mean, look what God did in the past, and now you're doing the exact same thing. Don't you think God's going to judge this situation just as much? And then we step back and take a look at our own lives and the things that we've confessed in the past, and we ask God to forgive us because we knew it was wrong. It was wrong when we did it. We know it's wrong now. And God chastened us, and then later on we do the exact same thing. And we don't tend to learn from our mistakes. And here's a good picture of Abraham. Abram not learning from his mistakes and not trusting God to take care of the situation. How many times we've been in a situation where we say something to the effect, well, I know God can take care of me. I know God could do this, but, and the word but means everything I just said, forget about, because this is really what I'm thinking. Well, yes, God can take care of us. No matter what the situation, no matter what we've been through in the past, God's taking care of us, and whatever we go through in the future, God can take care of us. And we have to learn that lesson, and sometimes it takes several attempts to get it right. But we do have to learn those lessons, and unfortunately, we live our lives sometimes and don't learn the lessons that God is trying to teach us. It happened with Abraham, it happens with us. It's not okay. I'm not saying, well, that's just the way life is, and we're going to confess the sin again in the future because we're going to do it again, and that's just the way man is. No. It means we have to learn from the past. We have to learn from our mistakes and our sin, and understand that if we want to be in fellowship with God, we're going to have to change the way that we live. Abraham eventually would get it right, and Abraham would become a great man as God told him. But the fact is, he failed and we failed, but that's no excuse to continue in sin. We need to recognize our failures and understand that God does forgive, but there can be consequences in our life because of that. All right, we'll talk more about this next week.